I'm James Swanwick. Welcome to the Alcohol-Free Lifestyle Podcast, where you learn to live a life of health, wealth, love, and happiness.
Have you ever wanted to create a change in your life, but been stuck in fear and procrastination? If so, you're in the right place. My guest today is Terese Mudgway. She's a former boardroom executive turned holistic healer who is an expert in supporting people to create the changes that they want in their lives. So I'm really excited to welcome Terese. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I'm excited today to talk to you, Terese, because I personally really struggle with change, like most of our listeners. And so the first question that I have for you is, why do you think it is so hard for someone who really wants to change to actually take action and create the change?
Okay, that's a very big question because it's multi-layered and multifaceted. And in kinesiology, we often work with and talk about a thing called sabotage. And we know that what we want, where we want to get to, and we can set a goal, yet we find ourselves going off track. Now, that is partly because of conditioning from a childhood, subconscious belief systems, and you've got to remember the number one thing that the brain is designed to do is survival. That is the number one thing. And depending on what your childhood experiences were, what your perceptions are, what your belief systems are, we can actually undo what it is that we want to do because of how it's been wired into the brain. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. So let's give an example. Let's say I'm wanting to quit drinking.
Yes.
But all my thoughts, beliefs and associations around drinking have a positive association. I associate positive things to drinking. Therefore, it makes sense to me that stopping drinking is going to be really painful in my mind, right?
That is a perfect example, and I've worked with many clients with that exact situation as well as cigarette smoking, because we all know logically in the frontal lobe part of our brain that tipping something like alcohol, which is a poison or a toxin, into our system, or smoking a cigarette, which is also a poison and a toxin, into our system, we know it is not healthy. We know it does not raise our life force. It does not support our health, our body, yet we still do it. And you're so correct, because what happens is we have to train ourselves to enjoy alcohol, and we have to actually train ourselves to enjoy cigarettes. And you hit the nail on the head there, Sarah, when you associate positive things in those early informative stages when you first started drinking. So can I give you an example of an actual client? Yep. Now, this client came to see me because his wife made him come and see me. So let me give you that context as a background. And she brought him along to see me because of his binge drinking.
Right.
And he didn't see it as a problem, but she did, because it impacted the whole family, etc., etc. Now, when I said to him, what is your greatest concern if you don't drink? And he said, well, life will be boring. And I said, okay. So if you don't have alcohol in your life, life will be boring. He said, yes, absolutely. Now, he was English, grew up in an area where there's a pub on every corner. And his earliest memories of fun and socializing was going down to the pub with his mum and dad. So already he's getting those subliminal messages at a visual level, witnessing happy mum, happy dad, socializing, we're at the pub, there's alcohol there. And it all gets embedded into the subconscious mind. And his belief system is that alcohol equals fun. So take fun, life becomes boring. Now, we know that's not logical, But it was really interesting in working with him because he had collapsed what happened, i.e., I went to the pub with mum and dad, got out of the house, and made it mean this is when mum and dad are happiest, this is when the fun happens. And he's collapsed the two in together, and it gets embedded into the subconscious mind. And it takes something to kind of pull back from that and observe what happened, distinguish that separate to what you made it mean, and look at them as two different separate entities. Now, I tried to explain this to him, but he still couldn't get it until I just kind of played a game with him. I said to him, I tell you what, you and your wife go away and have a romantic weekend. I'm going to look after your kids. And because I believe all children should be allowed to have lots and lots of fun, and you've told me that you can only have fun if you're drinking alcohol and otherwise life's going to be boring, we're going to start the kids off with tequila slammers. How does that work? And he looked at me and he's like, are you crazy? And I said, yeah, but you are telling me life is boring without alcohol. And if that is the case, then your children's lives must be really boring and they are never able to have fun. And it wasn't until I was able to get him to observe it outside of himself to see that fun and alcohol are two very separate, very different distinctions. But his brain had collapsed them in together and assimilated that. And then, of course, the brain loves to be right. So he went out collecting evidence, layer upon layer upon layer upon layer. And also consider that being part of a tribe is also important for our survival. So what happens when we socialize and drink? We are part of a tribe. So all that gets associated and assimilated in.
Yeah. So we've got the subconscious association with whatever it is that we're attached to, whether it's drinking, smoking, other
sugar.
Yeah. Combined as also, particularly when we're talking about addictive substances, with the additional boost of dopamine that creates the memory, that creates the association. So we've got that double whammy.
Yes.
And then we've also got the physiology, the changes that happen. So it's all of our senses, right? When we are creating associations, it's not just our thoughts, it's the feelings in the body and the nervous system.
Yeah, because as a kinesiologist, we work on the holistic, the whole human. So we talk about the triangle of health. And we say if we had an equilateral triangle and one side represented the physical structural, the second side represented the mental emotional, and the third side represented the biochemical. Now we know if we take an equilateral triangle and shorten or lengthen one side, it automatically impacts the other two. The same happens with us. We have a chemical trigger. It impacts us physically, mentally, and emotionally. We have a mental or emotional trigger. It impacts us physically, and so on and so forth. So you can't separate one from the other because we are whole beings and everything is functioning together at the same time.
So that leads me to question, because I'm putting myself in the shoes of a listener. It's like there's this big thing that I want to change in my life. Whether it's, let's say, drinking. Let's lead with that, bearing in mind this is alcohol-free lifestyle. I want to change drinking, but I'm conscious now, after listening to Terese, that I've got all these associations, my senses, my thoughts, my feelings, everything. What would be the first thing that somebody would need to do, in your experience, in order to make a shift from stuck to here's something I can do to actually move this change?
That's a tricky question for a kinesiologist because we work on a philosophy called bio-individuality. So I could have 10 different people come and see me for, let's say, changing behaviours and habits and belief systems around alcohol, and we can go into it through 20 different doorways, let's say. But one of the things that you want to look at is start to unpack what is the association and context that I have collapsed into drinking.
And what do I make it mean? Would you say that would be helpful if they identified the most powerful association, because people drink for a whole host of reasons that maybe if it's somebody like your client where the association is fun, whereas for someone else it might be
escape.
To relax, correct?
Relax, escape. Ask me the question again, sorry.
I'm just suggesting that maybe the first step could be, which is the most powerful association that you have with alcohol? Is it fun with your friends? Is it connection with your partner? Is it relaxing to wind down?
The first question I'd ask myself is, what am I afraid will happen or not happen if I don't drink? So you can go at it that way and come through, as I call it, the back door. And that's where you'll start to find, what have I collapsed it into? You could also go back and look at, okay, what is my earliest childhood memory of alcohol? Whether it's you took a sip of it somewhere or sneaked something out of mum or dad's glass, or whether it was an observational thing. And start to look at where the associations lie. But I always say, when there's such a strong drive, somewhere in your brain, there's a subconscious belief that you need this in order to survive.
Yeah. And I think that's something that we should clarify for listeners, that, you know, we have this primitive drive which overrides everything.
Yes.
Particularly when we are in an active addiction, because we're not coming from the smart part of the brain, it's the fight flight. And so the fear that is associated with the change is very primitive, right?
Yes,
it's
correct.
Like, I'm going to die, almost.
Correct, yes. It is deep set, and it won't make logical sense.
Yeah.
It won't make logical sense. And that's okay. And just giving yourself a piece of grace in the sense of, it's okay. I logically look at this and it doesn't make sense, and I feel that it's a bit crazy thinking that. That's okay. Because a lot of this stuff, the beliefs, the sabotages, the thought processes, the associations, get bedded in at a subliminal level before our brains are even fully developed.
Yeah.
Because you've got to remember, the brain keeps developing and growing till we're about 25, 26. Yeah. And most people in our Western culture have had their first experience, whether it's physically consuming alcohol or definitely observing it, way, way, way before then.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I personally, I think it was 15 when I had my first drink.
Yes.
And I was encouraged, as I'm sure many people are, by my parents. And they didn't think there was anything wrong with it. So you're already making these associations that it's perfectly normal to drink diluted poison on a regular basis.
Yeah, right. I know, it's crazy, isn't it? That's the thing. When you look at it like that, you go, okay.
Yeah, it doesn't, like you say, it doesn't make sense. And I think one of the things that you've just highlighted, which I think is so important, is to have grace in the first instance for where you are at.
Yes.
Because a lot of it has nothing to do with you.
No, because the more you beat yourself up, you perpetuate the shame, and then the shame perpetuates the pattern.
Correct. But yeah, I mean, the cycle of shame is designed to keep you in that drinking, which kind of, I just have to say this because is what the alcohol industry is very good at perpetuating.
Right.
Because the more shame is associated with not being able to control the substance, the more the drug is necessary.
Yeah, right.
So it's another thing that I think we have to wake up to, is that the shame that is perpetuated by this messaging that you should be able to drink responsibly is actually there for a reason. It's actually there to keep you drinking.
Now, I always say, when somebody says to me should, I always say, according to whose rule book?
Yeah.
According, and should is a judgment.
Yeah.
And then judgment perpetuates shame. And the other thing that you've just made me think of too, Sarah, is that there's a dynamic in any addiction which I speak to clients about, which is around this desire versus denial, denial versus desire. And I always say, if I do not desire something, you cannot deny me it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I cannot experience being denied something if I do not desire it. And so it's interesting to look at that desire, denial, denial, desire equation inside of this whole conversation of alcohol or any addiction for that matter.
Yeah. I guess I just want to clarify from what you're talking about, coming back to how do we create change?
Yes.
And the desire denial, just to clarify how
It's
that...
all perception. It is all perception. And remember, the mind is an extraordinary slave, but not always the nicest master. So part of the process of learning to change or changing anything in your life is learning to become the master of your thoughts and feelings.
Yeah.
Rather than reactive to it. Yeah. Easier said than done, right? I'm not saying it's as easy as flicking a switch. If it was, wouldn't that be great?
Well,
but it's...
Yeah. You'd be out of business.
I'd be out of business. This is so true. So it is understanding the perception to start with and be willing to start the process. Okay, well, what one thing, first and foremost, am I willing to change?
Yeah.
One step. And then whatever you do, don't beat yourself up when you make mistakes.
Yeah.
It's like changing anything, learning anything. We pick ourselves up after we fall over and then you dust yourself off and you keep building the muscle around it, until it becomes subconscious.
Yeah.
And it's just a way of being as opposed to something that you do.
In exactly the same way that the habit is created, right?
Correct.
Through repetition
Correct.
and reward. So let's talk about that, because one of the things that I think people skip, they make a decision, I'm going to change.
Yes.
And they take some action. They stop drinking or they stop smoking. But what they don't do is reward themselves for the new behaviour, which is why the change doesn't last. So how would you work with somebody in regards to that process? They've come to you, they're ready, they're willing, they believe they can do it, they have all the all the willingness in the world, and then they go out and do this new behaviour. What's next?
Okay, couple of things. Set yourself up for success. So put a simple structure around it. So for example, when I'm working with clients in weight loss or exercise, say, okay, well, what is something that you do every day? Well, I go and make a cup of tea in the morning. Good. So before you make your cup of tea, do 10 squats. How many cups of tea do you have a day? 4. Good. So by the end of the day, there will be 40 squats. So attach it to something that is already a rhythm and a positive habit in your life. So that's the structure side of things. The other thing is, it may be worth looking at, there's a cost versus a payoff. And this cost versus payoff, again, we're getting into the way the brain works, is often people relate to, well, I'm giving something up, so I'm going to miss out. Well, consider that what you're currently enjoying, if you like, or what you want to keep, is the payoff of feeling relaxed when I have a glass of wine, or the payoff of belonging to a social network, or the whatever it is that you, or the payoff of having fun, whatever you perceive you're getting out of it. But most people stay dancing in that framework. Sit down and go, okay, well, what is it actually costing me? Short term, medium term, and long term. Costing me and costing those around me. Then you've got the cost versus the payoff inside of the drinking. Then flip that and say, okay, what is the payoff of not drinking? What is the payoff? What am I actually short, medium and long term, going to get out of not having that cigarette, not having that drink, not having that sugar, not going gambling, etc.
Yeah. It's like choose your hard, right? We talk about this a lot.
Yes.
It's like it's hard to drink. It's hard not to drink. And which one are you going to choose ultimately? So we've talked about why it's so hard for people to change. And we've talked about how important it is when we're looking at changing something to be kind to ourselves, to be compassionate and to have grace, understanding that it's taken a long time to create these habits and associations, so it's going to take time to dismantle them, if you like, and change them. Then we've talked about the importance of creating a structure around the new behaviour.
Yes.
And then we touched on the reward for the new behaviour. So I just want to kind of really tap into that, because if we don't reward ourselves for the new behaviour, what happens?
Really good question, because I'm going to come straight back to that cost versus payoff.
Yes.
Right? And what we're actually doing, slow and steady, is shifting the neurological pathways. Because every time you do something different and you connect it with something positive that creates that dopamine or that oxytocin hit, then you are reconnecting or connecting new synapses to create new neurological pathways. And that is a critical part of change. We've spent years creating the habits and the patterns and the behaviors of who we think we are today. You'll have the Grand Canyon of neurological pathways that wants to keep you the same way as you are. So the more you reward the new behavior, the more you keep those positive feedback mechanisms biochemically and neurologically in the brain, the body, and the whole system. As I said, I'll go back to this many times. The brain is a very, very badly behaved master, but a very good slave. And it's the ability to learn how to lean out and begin to observe what you think and feel. Observe it, notice it. Thank you for sharing. I'm going to choose that, or I'm going to choose something else. And this might be just slowing everything down, because what we're dealing with a lot is the reactive mind.
Yeah.
A trigger, click, react. A trigger, click, react. And again, you've set up these neurological pathways for years. You've got years of evidence to prove how right you are that this system works, called I feel stressed, have a drink, I feel relaxed. Excellent. Let's do more.
Yeah.
No, that is what you've set your brain up and your system up to believe. There is another way. It's your willingness to choose. I often say changing a habit only has to happen once. And it's once in this moment, once in the next moment, once in the next moment, once in the next moment.
Yeah.
And it's who and how you are going to be in any and every given moment that this presents itself.
Yeah.
Stop, breathe, observe, consciously choose.
Yeah. And I think that's so powerful for if somebody is just starting out, even if they say to themselves, I'm going to stop for 30 seconds before I have the drink. Even starting that process can be helpful, right?
Correct. I had one chap I worked with on giving up smoking, and I said to him, so I've got some homework for you to do. Before you have any cigarette, I want you to get a little notebook and a pen, and I want you to write down all the reasons, and there's got to be a minimum of 10, why you think you need this cigarette right now. That's all we did.
Yeah.
And he got so sick of writing it down and got so distracted that he cut his smoking in half just like that, because of implementing that new discipline, which made him more conscious, which made him more present to what was going on.
Yeah, because it's interrupting that pattern, right?
Correct.
It's like literally interrupting the autopilot behaviour that's been running for 10, 20, 30 years. This is so exciting to really pull apart the reality of what's actually happening behind the scenes. Because when we think about it, logically, like you say, it's like, this is crazy. Why am I doing this thing? And you have that cognitive dissonance. But when you actually really understand the process, it almost, as you said just then, allows us to step back and be conscious. Oh, here's a little system that's happening.
Yeah.
And I personally have the ability to choose. So what else can we do? What else can we do to make change less daunting?
Good question. You know how earlier in the interview I talked about one of the important things is creating structure. And I call it structure for workability. So what is going to make this more workable for you? And one of the assets that we have in our lives are the people we surround ourselves with.
Yeah. So
if they are an asset. So you get to say, are they an asset? Yes, good. I'm going to keep them on board. If they're not, maybe have a conversation or shift it around a bit. Because if you can create your community as part of the support structure, they're on board with what you're doing. They know what you're committed to, and they are going to support you inside of that rather than having to deal with having to justify or reason or explain your choices, because your choices are your choices.
Yeah, and it's a hard enough thing to do in and of itself without having support, particularly as you said before, all these associations are made not just with the substance but with all the people that are saying it's okay to do this and you have to do this in order to fit in. So it leads me to the question that comes up quite often in our groups, which is, how do I communicate this change to people who I feel might resist my decision?
Oh, I love this stuff because I love communication. I love empowering communication. So the first thing I would suggest all your listeners consider is their stuff is their stuff. Do not take their stuff on board. So if somebody has a problem with you not drinking, that is their problem. It is not your problem. Now, you could say, well, that's your problem. It's not my problem. However, sometimes people can be very stubborn and very persistent. So if you come across somebody that is difficult and just kind of hounding you, yeah, but why? There's two ways you can handle it. You can go back to them with a question and you say, that's interesting. Do you have a concern about me not drinking? And they may say, well, no, but I just want to know why. Well, why do you need to know why? What is your concern? Now, this is just a little side snippet. The brain cannot help but be interrupted with a question. Now, this is good for an internal dialogue. So if you're going on an internal dialogue and the freight train is going down, heading straight for that bottle of wine, then ask the question, why do I want it? That is the first thing we'll interrupt. But it's also going to interrupt that person that's asking you these questions. And they believe they deserve a justification or a reasoning for you. Okay, so that's one option that you can go down. The other one is because I'm choosing to.
Yeah.
And it is that simple. I choose not to drink because I choose not to drink. So depending on how confident you feel about that, that can be a very simple solution. I choose because I choose. Nowhere for anyone to go. Now, if you're feeling a little bit more vulnerable or fragile around it, something simple like, well, I've actually been exploring all the benefits around living an alcohol-free life. Would you like to hear about those?
Yeah. Or even just, like I've found that I feel better without it.
And goodness me, I wake up brighter.
Mm-hmm.
I've lost weight. I'm feeling clearer in the head. I don't get brain fog. Would you like to try it? and I love the fact that you and I are laughing about this, and it's not a laughing matter. And if you can give yourself a sense of humor around it too, and almost allow yourself to play with the conversation a little bit, it'll lighten it up for you. It'll lighten it up for them as well.
I think that's such a good point, because we in the program also encourage our members not to talk about it in this kind of really serious way, because even though it is a serious issue, it's the way that we communicate it that creates so much of the darkness around it and the fear. If we can talk about it in a more positive way, in a more aspirational way, I'm choosing this lifestyle for all the reasons, the positive reasons, as opposed to,
correct,
there's something wrong with me and I can't. It's a very different conversation, isn't it?
Yeah, again, it's cost versus payoff. We're going to dance in all the upside.
Yeah.
What are the benefits? What am I going to gain? And I often say to clients that part of the trauma around everything is not what happened or what I did or what I didn't do. It's all about what we make it mean. I talk to clients whether they're 10 or they're 80, and I educate them on the meaning-making monsters. And the meaning-making monsters are running around in your head, between your ears, adding meaning to everything that happens or doesn't happen, everything you did or didn't do, and then they feed it into this big grey machine called the meaning-making machine and spit out usually weapons of mass destruction. Yeah. And we use those weapons against ourselves. So even in the dialogue, when you're creating that support network around you, is listen to the dialogue that you're having. Oh, what do they think of this? What do they think? What are you making it mean all the time? And the meaning we add is all made up. Yeah. Nothing means anything until we give it meaning. So even when you look at having a conversation with people, what am I making that mean? They're challenging me. They're asking me, what am I making now? I don't think they believe me. What does that mean about me? Oh, I must be wrong. They must think I call it the committee meetings.
Are they bored? Are they fed up?
Yeah. Right? So again, it's another way to be present and lean out and observe what's going on in your head rather than being on autopilot and being reactive to it all the time. Set yourself up to win. Create structures that empower you. Create structures that are easy, simple. And remember, it's a moment by moment choice. Often people say, oh my goodness, I've got to do this for the rest of my life. Whether it's adding something in or giving something up. No, you don't. You just do it once. And then you do it once. Next day, next minute.
I'm so glad that you said that, Terese, because we talked about the fear of change, and I think the fear of change also, that idea that it's forever, that I can never drink again or I can never do something again, creates a lot of fear. So I love that you've talked about that just moment to moment.
Yes, and it's interesting too, because most of the time we think that we're living in the present based on the past that we've come from.
Yeah.
But it's actually not. It's about the future that you perceive is in front of you. And if you see a future with missing out or being alone or whatever it is, you're not going to be that excited about stepping into that future. So have a look at what are you projecting out there in your mind's eye into your future. Do you see yourself looking happier, feeling lighter, creating new friendships and networks and being kind to yourself? And you may not have a reference point for that. So start to create one.
Yeah. Because I think, like you said before, we find what we're looking for, right?
Correct. Because every trigger or stimuli you get in life, when you get to a certain age, and it's not that old, the brain goes back into the filing system of the past and says, oh, okay, what does that taste, smell, sound, feel like? Based on a reference point of something that's happened before.
Yeah.
Again, it's a survival protection mechanism. However, it does not always serve you because the reference point was made at an age or a time where you did not have the full picture or the full context.
Yeah. So taking you back to the client
Yes.
who had this idea that he couldn't have fun without alcohol.
Yes.
And then you said, well, I'm going to take your kids and give them a couple of vodkas.
Yeah.
I have to because you want them to have fun. What happened to that guy?
Very good question. Well, first of all, there was a look of shock on his face, but you could see the cogs turning. And it's interesting to bear witness to something like this when you do a massive pattern interrupt. And that was quite a brutal pattern interrupt for him.
Yeah.
And the brain just fights it. It doesn't want to know because it collapses in something he's been collecting evidence for 40 odd years it was.
Yeah.
So initially there was a bit of fighting backwards and forwards, and it's retraining your reference for fun. Well, let's break down. What is fun?
Yeah.
Well, fun could be playing it in the yard with the children. It can be surfing. It can be, yes. So let's have a look at all those things that are fun that do not contain alcohol.
Yeah.
And back in my old marketing days, we used to talk about this thing called mother statements, which is basically a broad everyone, no one, everything, always, these big, broad, global encapsulating statements that we have. Well, I can't have any fun without alcohol.
Yeah. I'll never be able to.
So one of the structures you can put in place, and I suggest you get your families or your friends involved in this, is to start to catch yourself out, inside of the dialogue that you have around alcohol and start to change it. And again, ask your loved ones, your friends, your family to call you on it kindly and gently when you have a conversation that is kind of reframing alcohol in a way that does not serve you.
Yeah.
I'll never meet a partner.
I'll
that's
never
not...
get a promotion.
Yeah. Oh, well, if I don't go and drink with the boys after work, or if I don't socialise, nobody will like me.
Yeah.
And I always say, really? According to whom? Also, no one will ever like you. Yeah. Well, not no one. Well, you just said no one. And remember, the brain does not know the difference between real and imagined. So if you say, no one will ever want to hang out with me, that's what the brain will look for.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then we get into a whole new conversation that I doubt whether we've got time for today, about creating one's own reality, depending on the context and the lens through which you view your life. Perspective.
Yeah, it leads me to think about how we can tap into that reality, which is what we tell ourselves is what we find and what we see.
Correct.
And going from that catastrophizing of the never and the always is, I wonder if there's an ability that we have to be able to say something like, I always find a way, which is a lot more empowering way of using that type of language.
Correct. The ability to flip it.
Yeah.
Because we're either moving away from or we're moving toward. And I suggest all your listeners have a look at their own internal dialogue around the alcohol and their relationship with it, and have a look at their mindset. Am I focusing on what I'm moving away from? Or am I focusing on what I'm moving toward? The moment you look at what you're missing out on, i.e. the way from, the moment you do that, catch that and ask yourself, well, what am I gaining? What am I working toward? And it's these constant catching that, putting a new habit in place.
Yeah. Fascinating.
I love it. I love human beings, and I find human beings fascinating.
I can tell. So tell me, before we finish up, you are a kinesiologist.
Yes.
Can you explain briefly what that is to our audience?
Well, we've kind of touched on it. You've woven it in nicely in the questions that you've asked, because it's all three sides of the triangle of health that I mentioned earlier. And I always say kinesiology is the most holistic of all modalities out there, because it deals with every single aspect of what it is to be human. You know, we didn't even touch on the spiritual side of things, and that's whatever it represents to anyone else. But the thing I love about it, it works on a thing called bioindividuality, which means I could have 10 people come in and see me for the same complaint, and we do very different things with every single person. Because what is that individual's pathway to healing, for lack of a better word, can be very different to everybody else's. So we don't work on symptoms, we don't diagnose, we work on bringing the body's energetic being system back to a state of homeostasis. Again, whether it's mental, emotional, physical, structural, biochemical, around that triangle. And bringing that person and their whole being back to a state of homeostasis so the body can do what it is designed to do, and that is to heal itself. Because we've seen it. Every one of us have had a scratch or a cut. We don't do anything to it, and the body naturally heals itself. But guess what the biggest thing is that gets in the way of that? Your mind.
Yeah.
As I say, weapon of mass destruction, or the greatest, most powerful creative creation for good.
Yeah.
That's where you have a choice.
Yeah.
And it takes training. It's like anything else.
We didn't get taught, right? We didn't get
Correct.
a manual.
We didn't get a manual. Would have been nice.
Would have been helpful.
Definitely. Time, money, effort, heartbreak, struggle, etc. But then look at the gift of going through the journey. They say one of the greatest things in happiness is overcoming something and getting on the other side of it.
Yeah.
That reward.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you, Terese. It's been an honour and a pleasure.
Well, thank you very much.
Pick your marvellous brain. There is a workshop that I attended through Terese's organisation that was amazing. And whilst they do work on individuals, there are some really cool tools that they teach in this workshop that you can actually apply to yourself on your own. What are they called? Kinesiological tools?
Kinesiological tools and techniques, including being able to biohack your subconscious mind.
Ooh.
So imagine if you had access to hack your subconscious mind and go, okay, well, what is the key emotion that I've got driving this habit that does not serve me? How can I balance my energy to bring it back into a centered alignment to actually help support me? And yeah, I mean, I've been a kinesiologist for 25 years or more. So that's one of the structures that I use in my everyday life as a tool of well-being and self-empowerment. And at this workshop, we teach you quite a few of these tools. And you can go home and you can use them every day.
Yeah, it's amazing. I highly recommend. I did the workshop a couple of months ago. Used the jet lag one.
Oh, yes. Yeah, it's amazing.
Amazing. So if you're interested in that, there'll be some details in the show notes. Thank you so much, Terese.
Oh, thank you for having me. And my greatest privilege is being able to contribute to anybody who's willing to listen. So all of those listeners out there, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. This is Sarah Connolly and Terese Mudgway for the Alcohol Free Lifestyle podcast.
Thank you so much for listening. For more content like this, you can check out our YouTube channel at alcoholfreelifestyle.com/YouTube. You can follow me and send me a direct message on Instagram and TikTok at James Swanwick. And you can see the results of our scientific study at alcoholfreelifestyle.com/study. If you'd like to apply to become a Stop Drinking client, you can visit alcoholfreelifestyle.com/project90. I wrote a book called The 30-Day No Alcohol Challenge, which you can find on Amazon at james@alcoholfreelifestyle.com. If you're a regular listener of the show, would you please do me a big favor and give the show a rating and a review? It helps us get more listeners, and you'll be potentially helping someone else out there who's struggling with alcohol to find us, to listen to us and get support. Thanks so much for listening. We'll catch you on the next one.